There is a very specific feeling that happens inside a band the moment they realize they just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. Not a business mistake, not a creative gamble. I mean the specific sickening moment when you look across a room, or a courtroom, or a chart, and understand that you just handed a winning lottery ticket to the person you were trying to get rid of. Some bands saw it coming. Most of them did not. Today we are talking about 10 bands that fired their star, and then found out exactly what that cost them. Let's start counting. Number 10, The Clash plus Mick Jones, 1983. I want to start with a story I think is one of the most underrated self-destructions in rock history. Because when people talk about The Clash falling apart, they tend to talk about it like it was inevitable. Like it had already burned too bright for too long to survive. And I have never believed that. Joe Strummer was one of the most urgent, morally awake voices that rock music has ever produced. Mick Jones was the melody, the hook, the reason those songs got inside you before you even realized what was happening. That partnership, Strummer's politics and his fury, Jones's absolute ear for the chorus that leaves a mark, that was The Clash. In September 1983, Strummer and bassist Paul Simonon fired Mick Jones. The official reason was that Jones had drifted from the original values of the band. Jones has disputed that characterization for 40 years. And honestly, looking at the timeline, it is not hard to see why. And here is the part I did not know when I started digging into this story. The part that still makes me shake my head. After Jones was gone, The Clash brought in two replacement guitarists, Nick Sheppard and Vince White. And then they made an album called Cut the Crap, released in November 1985. Joe Strummer later admitted the production had been essentially forced on the band by their management, and that the record should never have come out under that name. He said it in those words. Eventually, he disowned it entirely. You knew just by listening that the thing that made those records live was not on that tape anymore. Meanwhile, Mick Jones did what great musicians always do when someone tells them they are finished. He formed Big Audio Dynamite in 1984. He started making some of the most forward-thinking, genre-blending music of the decade. Jones was not wounded. Jones was free. The Clash dissolved in 1986. Strummer said in later years that the way things ended with Mick Jones was one of the deepest regrets of his career. I believe him. Number 9, The Eagles plus Don Felder, 2001. There is a word that comes to me when I think about the Eagles, and it is not Hotel California. The word is complicated, because the Eagles had everything. Genuinely, they had everything. And then, in a very specifically eagle-shaped way, they found a way to make everything ugly. Don Felder joined in 1974. He was a Florida guitarist with blues rock instincts and a genuinely cinematic ear for atmosphere. He had actually gone to high school with Bernie Leadon, one of the original Eagles. Felder came in during the band's creative pivot, the transition away from country folk and towards something harder, more dangerous, more architectural. And Felder was the musician who made that pivot work. I need to say this clearly. Don Felder did not just play on Hotel California. He wrote the central guitar figure. That opening descending guitar line that sounds like sunlight and dread at the same time, that is Felder. He brought it to the band as a home demo. Frey and Henley wrote the lyrics around it. But the sonic reason Hotel California sounds like the greatest rock song ever recorded, that is Felder's instinct.
Life in the fast lane.
And here is the part that tightens something in my chest every time I think about it. By the time of the 1994 reunion, the revenue structure of the band had been quietly reorganized. Henley and Frey were taking a significantly larger share. Felder, a full partner since 1974, pushed back. They pushed harder.
We're rushing down freeway, mess around and got lost.
On February 6, 2001, Don Felder was formally fired. He learned through a letter from the band's manager. He sued, they countersued, he wrote a book, they sued to stop the book from being published. It was a full, comprehensive mess. And yes, the Eagles kept going. Glenn Frey died in 2016, and the band still tours in some form today. They were not commercially destroyed by this decision the way some bands on this list were, but something was gone the moment Felder walked out the door. Something essential about the version of this band that made Hotel California possible. The man who wrote the music for their greatest song was treated like a hired hand. Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story. Number 8, Journey plus Steve Perry, 1998.
Born and raised right here in Houston.
I am going to be honest with you before we get into this one. I grew up on Journey. Not ironically, not with careful critical distance. I had the cassettes. I remember exactly where I was the first time Don't Stop Believin' stopped being background music and became something personal. I was young and I had the window down and that piano figure hit and I thought, who in the world is that? Steve Perry. There has never been a voice in arena rock like Steve Perry's. There never will be. When the band broke up in the late 80s, it was partly the result of Perry burning out. Losing his connection to the music, dealing with losses in his personal life, genuinely needing to stop. The silence lasted nearly a decade. Then, the mid-90s reunion. The 1996 album Trial by Fire, which debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, went platinum, included a Grammy-nominated single, When You Love a Woman, was a top 20 hit. A comeback tour was being organized. The second act looked real. Then Perry went hiking in Hawaii and felt something give way in his hip, a degenerative bone condition. He needed hip replacement surgery to be able to tour. He was hesitant to have the operation. The band waited. They waited nearly 17 months. In 1998, Jonathan Cain and Neil Schon gave Perry an ultimatum: surgery and tour, or they would move forward with a replacement. Perry chose to leave rather than be forced. And I know you know that specific kind of loss, when a relationship that should have had more room in it ran out of runway because neither side could quite bend far enough. Journey replaced Perry with Steve Augeri, then Jeff Scott Soto, then Arnel Pineda, whom Neil Schon found on YouTube doing Journey covers at a nightclub in Manila. And Pineda is genuinely gifted. He kept the band alive and working. But in all the years that followed, no version of Journey with a different singer was ever quite in the conversation the way they were when Perry was on the microphone. Some voices cannot be replaced. They can only be worked around. The music industry treats that as a logistics problem. It is not a logistics problem. It is the truth. Number 7. Queensrÿche plus Jeff Tate, 2012. Before the internet told everyone who to be angry at in real time, there were the band lawsuits of the early 2010s, and none of them were messier, or stranger, or more genuinely difficult to explain in polite company than what happened to Queensrÿche. For the uninitiated, Queensrÿche are one of the defining progressive metal bands of the late 80s. Operation Mindcrime is a legitimate landmark record. Empire produced Silent Lucidity, one of the most emotionally devastating songs heavy metal has ever produced. These are not minor achievements. Jeff Tate had been their vocalist since the band's formation in the early 80s. His operatic range, his theatrical conviction, his genuine intelligence as a singer, Tate was Queensrÿche in the same way that certain singers become the entire reason a sound exists. In April 2012, in the lead-up to a show in São Paulo, Brazil, the other three founding members, guitarist Michael Wilton, bassist Eddie Jackson, drummer Scott Rockenfield, decided they were done. They fired Tate's wife as band manager and his stepdaughter from running the fan club, without involving Tate in the decision. When Tate found out backstage, things went sideways in a way that reportedly involved a thrown drum kit and a physical altercation that multiple sources have described in considerable detail. The official firing came by legal letter in June 2012, after 30 years of working together. And here is the part I absolutely did not see coming. Rather than settle privately, both sides continued performing under the Queensrÿche name simultaneously. For nearly 2 years, there were two Queensrÿches on the road at the same time, both releasing albums, both calling themselves Queensrÿche, both suing each other. You just smiled. I know you did, because I did the same thing when I found this in the research. The legal settlement came in 2014. The band, with new singer Todd La Torre, kept the Queensrÿche name. Tate was granted exclusive rights to perform Operation Mindcrime in its entirety on tour. 30 years of one of metal's most ambitious bands divided by lawyers into two separate performance agreements. That is not just losing everything. That is losing everything in front of an audience that was already confused about what they were watching. Number 6, Van Halen plus Sammy Hagar, 1996. I want to say something that might be slightly controversial, and I want to say it up front. The Sammy Hagar era of Van Halen was good. Not a consolation prize, not a pale shadow. 5150, OU 812, for unlawful carnal knowledge. Balance, 4 albums. 4 #1 records in the United States. That era had identity. It had real songs. Hagar's voice over Eddie Van Halen's guitar was a completely different proposition from the David Lee Roth era. But it was a genuine proposition. It worked. And in 1996, Van Halen fired it. The exact circumstances are still disputed. Hagar says Eddie Van Halen called him on Father's Day morning and essentially told him he was done. The Van Halens say Hagar had announced he wanted to return to being a solo artist. Either way. After 4 #1 albums and 11 years, Hagar was out. What came next is where this story becomes genuinely uncomfortable to watch. Van Halen brought in Gary Cherone, formerly of Extreme, a talented singer, a genuinely good person who has said himself, looking back, that they should have toured together before recording an album. That they never quite found each other in the studio the way they needed to. They released Van Halen III in March 1998. The band was confident. The rollout was serious. The album debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200, which sounds reasonable until you understand that every one of their previous 4 albums had reached number 1. The critics were not kind. The fans were disoriented. The longest song on the record runs over 8 minutes. The album itself runs 65 minutes. There is a 6.5-minute radio single. There is a track where Eddie Van Halen sings lead vocals over a piano arrangement that one reviewer compared to something from The Wall. Cherone left in 1999. He and the band parted amicably, and then Van Halen released no new studio album for 14 years. 14 years, from a band that had delivered 4 consecutive #1 records. That kind of silence does not happen by accident. It happens when a band loses the thing that makes the machine run, and then tries to replace it with something that cannot do the same job, and then has to stop, and figure out where they actually are. Number 5. Judas Priest plus Rob Halford, 1992. There is no voice in heavy metal history like Rob Halford's. I am saying that with complete conviction and without any interest in the argument. The 4-octave range, the operatic authority, the specific way he could take a Glenn Tipton riff and turn it into something that felt like standing in a cathedral that was also on fire. That was Halford. That was Judas Priest at its highest altitude. Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, Painkiller. Those are benchmark records. In May 1992, Halford left Judas Priest. The reasons are genuinely complicated. Halford has described it as a miscommunication, a moment when the band was in an incredibly fragile place after the Reno trial, in which they were accused of placing subliminal messages in their music following a tragedy involving 2 young fans. They had made Painkiller and toured exhaustively. Everyone was burned down to the foundation. Halford wanted space to pursue a solo project. The communication between both sides broke down. The split became permanent before anyone quite intended it to. Judas Priest went on hiatus for 4 years. 4 years of searching before they found Tim "Ripper" Owens, who had been fronting a Judas Priest tribute band in Akron, Ohio. His story became the basis for the 2001 Mark Wahlberg film, Rockstar. And that should tell you something about how remarkable it is that a tribute band singer ended up in the actual band. Ripper Owens is a talented vocalist. The song Bullet Train from Jugulator earned a Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance. He clearly brought something real to those sessions. But the 2 albums Judas Priest released with Owens sold well under 100,000 copies combined. The band went from headlining arenas to clubs. Owens himself said in an interview that if Rob Halford had sung Jugulator, people would have called it a masterpiece. He is probably right. Halford came back in 2003. When he walked back out on that stage as Judas Priest, it was the first time in 11 years that the sound was what it was supposed to be. Some things are not replaceable. Judas Priest had to spend 11 years learning that in public.
Number 4. Stone Temple Pilots plus Scott Weiland, 2013. Scott Weiland co-founded Stone Temple Pilots. He named the band. He was on lead vocals for every album. He was the frontman who made Core one of the most visceral debut records of the 90s. Physically, emotionally, vocally. Purple, tiny music. Those albums have a texture that exists entirely because of who Weiland was. Unpredictable, theatrical, genuinely dangerous in the best possible musical sense. The voice was singular. There wasn't another voice like it. On February 27, 2013, the DeLeo brothers and drummer Eric Kretz released a single-sentence statement. Stone Temple Pilots have announced they have officially terminated Scott Weiland. One sentence. Scott Weiland found out he had been fired from the band he co-founded by reading it in the press, the same way the rest of the world did. He responded immediately. Not sure how I can be terminated from a band that I founded, fronted, and co-wrote many of its biggest hits, but that's something for the lawyers to figure out. There is something raw in that sentence that I keep coming back to. The band replaced Weiland with Chester Bennington. Chester was a genuinely gifted vocalist and a good person who gave the project everything he had. They released an EP in 2013 under the Stone Temple Pilots name. The album sold approximately 35,000 copies in the United States. For comparison, the previous STP album, the 2010 self-titled record with Weiland singing, had debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 with 62,000 copies in its first week. Chester Bennington performed his last show with Stone Temple Pilots on November 9, 2015. Less than a month later, on December 3, 2015, Scott Weiland was found dead on his tour bus. I've never been able to close this entry the way I want to, because the story doesn't close cleanly. 2 years between the firing and the death. The band that fired him, the singer they replaced him with, the voice that was gone, all of it tangled together in a way that has never fully resolved. It's the entry that sits with me the heaviest. Some things you can't take back. Some decisions have consequences that outlast everyone involved. Number 3. Guns N' Roses plus the classic lineup, 1994 to 2008, September 1991. Guns N' Roses releases Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2 simultaneously. The two albums debut at numbers 2 and 1 on the Billboard 200, the only act in history to place two albums back-to-back in the top 2 positions at the same time. The Use Your Illusion tour lasts almost 3 years. It plays to more than 7 million people across 194 shows in 27 countries. 7 million people. And from that peak, from arguably the highest point any rock band had reached in the early 90s, Axl Rose systematically dismantled every single piece of it. It started in 1994 when rhythm guitarist Gilby Clarke discovered he was no longer in the band, not through a conversation, but through his paychecks, simply stopping. Then Slash, the top hat, the riff, the face of Guns N' Roses as much as any image the band ever produced. Quit in 1996, driven out by creative disagreements and by Axl's decision to bring his own friend into the recording sessions without consulting the band. Duff McKagan, the bassist who had been there from day one, left in 1997. Within 3 years, every single classic member except Axl Rose and keyboardist Dizzy Reed was gone. And here is the part that I still cannot fully wrap my head around. Axl Rose then announced that the new Guns N' Roses would make the greatest album in rock history. He spent 14 years. 14 years. He cycled through at least 10 guitarists, including Buckethead, a genuinely innovative player who performed wearing a KFC bucket on his head. The recording sessions reportedly cost approximately $13 million. Chinese Democracy was finally released in November 2008. It debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, and then it was gone. Not because it is a complete failure of a record, there are genuinely interesting moments on it. But $13 million and 14 years cannot manufacture what Appetite for Destruction had, which was 5 people who grew up together, were hungry and broke and absolutely alive, and recorded their debut album for almost nothing. You cannot rebuild that chemistry with time and money. Guns N' Roses proved that to the entire industry over the course of a decade and a half. Some lessons are extraordinarily expensive. Number 2. Mötley Crüe plus Vince Neil, 1992.
Well, you did fucking all right.
On February 10th, 1992, in a rehearsal space in Los Angeles, 3 members of Mötley Crüe told their 4th member he was done, Vince Neil. The voice on every single Crüe record since the beginning. The scream that opened Shout at the Devil. The frontman who had helped make Dr. Feelgood the best-selling album of 1989, not best-selling metal album, best-selling album, period, number 1, triple platinum, a commercial apex that most bands never get anywhere close to. The remaining members, Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, Mick Mars, were convinced the music was bigger than any one person. They hired John Corabi, a genuinely great vocalist, bluesy, powerful, technically a more demanding singer than almost anyone you'd find in that position. And he could sing the back catalog. He brought real things to those sessions. None of it mattered. The 1994 self-titled Mötley Crüe album reached the Billboard Top 10, but sold a fraction of what Dr. Feelgood had. And the tour, and this is the part that I think is the clearest image of what the firing actually cost them, the tour required them to downsize from arenas to clubs and theaters. Not as a choice, because the venues they had always played were not booking them anymore. Because the audience that had loved Mötley Crüe had loved them with a specific voice on the front, and that voice wasn't there. Their guarantees dropped from arena-level numbers to club-level numbers almost immediately. Their own record label eventually told them, "Bring Vince back, or there will be no next record." And here is the thing I think about every time I tell this story. Corabi later said that when Six told him they were bringing Vince back, he was devastated. And then in the next breath, he said he was also relieved, because the pressure had become unbearable. Because being John Corabi in Mötley Crüe without Vince Neil is one of the most thankless positions in the history of rock music.
Everybody on Nikki Sixx's side of the stage!
They reunited with Neil in 1997, and the machine came back to life, imperfectly, but recognizably. The lesson had been delivered. It cost them 5 years and a significant portion of their commercial standing to receive it. Some things are only valuable in retrospect. This was one of them.
Number 1. Black Sabbath plus Ozzy Osbourne, 1979. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, Bill Ward, 3 of the 4 men who had formed this band together in Birmingham in 1968, who had grown up on the same streets, who had built something genuinely unprecedented in heavy music. Decided that Ozzy's substance abuse had made it impossible to continue. And look, the situation was real. Ozzy had disappeared for 6 weeks during rehearsals for the new album. He would show up unable to function. The band could not move forward. But here is what Ozzy said about it. And he said it for the rest of his life, in interview after interview, right up until the end. Firing me for being messed up was hypocritical. We were all messed up. If you're stoned and I'm stoned and you're telling me I'm fired because I'm stoned, how can that be? Because I'm slightly more stoned than you are? There is something in that statement that tells you exactly who Ozzy Osbourne was. Black Sabbath replaced him with Ronnie James Dio, and I want to be clear, this part of the story went well. Heaven and Hell is a magnificent album. Mob Rules is a legitimate heavy metal benchmark. Dio was one of the greatest vocalists the genre ever produced, and what he made with Sabbath is a real legacy. But Dio left acrimoniously in 1982, and after that, after the Dio chapter closed, Black Sabbath spent the next 15 years cycling through singers. Ian Gillan, Glenn Hughes, Ray Gillan, Tony Martin. Dio again, briefly, more Tony Martin. The revolving door never stopped turning. Meanwhile, and this is the plant I laid earlier in this list paying off right now, Ozzy Osbourne went to Los Angeles with a manager named Sharon Arden, found a 25-year-old guitar prodigy from Ohio named Randy Rhoads, and made Blizzard of Oz in 1980, 1 year after being fired. What followed is one of the most remarkable second acts in rock history. Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Bark at the Moon, The Ultimate Sin, No Rest for the Wicked, 11 solo studio albums, the Ozfest Touring Festival, which he co-created and which ran for years, and launched the careers of dozens of bands. The Osbournes reality show, which somehow made Ozzy Osbourne one of the most recognizable people in the world in the early 2000s. A cultural footprint so enormous that the man the band fired for being a liability became, in time, a genuine institution. In the 1980s, during the peak of the Ozzy solo years, Ozzy Osbourne was more commercially successful than Black Sabbath. Let me say that again so it lands properly. The man they fired was more commercially successful than the band that fired him. They finally reunited in 1997. And when it was Iommi and Butler and Ward and Ozzy on that stage again, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the sound was what it was supposed to be. Everything that had been missing for 15 years was suddenly present again. And I know what you are thinking right now, because I thought it too, and I felt it differently when I was building this video than I ever had before. Ozzy Osbourne played his final concert at Villa Park in Birmingham, his hometown, on July 5th, 2025.
Thank you. God bless you all. God bless you.
A farewell show, a goodbye. 3 weeks later, on July 22nd, he was gone. I sat with that for a long time. I keep sitting with it, because what this story is about, underneath all the drama, the revolving door of replacements, the commercial comparisons, the eventual reunions, is about what you cannot replace once you've had it and let it go. What a band loses when they fire someone who was not just their singer but the specific human reason their sound existed in the first place. Black Sabbath fired their co-founder in 1979. And they spent the next 18 years learning, in the most visible and public way possible, that they had fired the wrong person. And then they came back together, and they made it right. And they did something most bands on this list never got to do. They finished the story together, on their terms, in the city where it all began. And now that voice is gone.